So, what day of the Omar is it? Ah, okay. At this time, we get to hear from the great Khan Shaul Hawkins. Shabbat Shalom! Welcome home, saints of Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. We got a lot to cover this morning, so we're going to jump in with both feet head first here. You'll be turning over to Genesis 28. Genesis 28. And I think you'll agree with the words of the patriarch Jacob here. In verse 17, he says, how wonderful, how awesome is this place. This is none other than the house of Yahweh. And this is the gate, the entrance, and the way, the only way into the kingdom of Yahweh. And brethren, we got to get this firmly in our mind. We've got to realize that this is Yahweh's house, and Yahweh is here. He's only here. This is the only place we can find Him. Here, okay? And we've got to get Yahweh has been trying to get our attention to realize and to see this for years now, and He's even stepped up His efforts. He's going to extremes to get our attention so that we will believe, as Yeshua said, all that the prophets have spoken. Now, I want to just show you here, we've got 3 new books this feast for you to get. We've got the 2010 Yearbook of the Prophetic Words and Newsletters. We've got the 11th Book of Israel, Part 2. Praise Yahweh. And then our children were writing in and telling us that some of their parents were having a hard time understanding these books of Israel, and could we help break this down and make it easier for them? Well, the crew got together, and that's exactly what we did. Here, it's called the Children's Edition, but this is a beautiful book. This is a very, very special book. And I urge everyone, get all 3 of these. These are pastor's copies right here. But get all 3 of these and study them. But this children's book, we had such trouble, with the 666 computers and getting this thing to run right on the press and everything, that I know Satan was fighting tooth and nail against that book. So believe me, that is a very special book. And please don't neglect this food that's here at Yahweh's house. And boy, does Yahweh have a feast prepared for you. I'll tell you, the knowledge and the information that's going to come out, you're going to be agreeing with Jacob even more so, that this is his house, and he is supporting, he is protecting, and he is guiding every move that takes place in the house of Yahweh. And we need to believe this, we need to live it, we need to be singing this song. But in continuing in Genesis 28, here we see, if you start and mark down 11 through 16, we're going to have to move quickly through these scriptures here, but we see that Jacob went to the house of Yahweh. It says he went to a certain place as though he didn't know where he was going, and he fell asleep and he woke up. All right, well, Yahweh gives him the promise here. He says, and behold, in verse 13, Yahweh stood there. Now, it wasn't Yahweh, of course. We know it was the great priest. We know it was Melchizedek. And I am the father of Abraham, your father, and the father of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your descendants. Notice verse 14, and your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and the east and to the north and the south, and in you and in your seed, all the families of the earth will be blessed, shall be blessed. Now, what's contained in that is the tribes that went out and brought this world into the deep, dark sin from which we were pulled. And also the promise of Yeshua there. And the difference between us and Yeshua, Yeshua wasn't pulled out of deep, dark sin. He never sinned, not once. He couldn't be that blessing of the perfect sacrifice for us. But we're different. We were pulled out of the deep, dark sin, and he's saying, who's going to bring it there? And Pastor's gone to extremes. It's all in the books of Israel, showing that history of how the deep, dark sin engulfed this earth, and to where we are in these last days, mankind about to destroy himself off of the face of the earth. But he says, but then the promise, behold, I am with you. Now this is a promise to the house and to the work, because we're going to see that it was also given to Yeshua. And I will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised to you. Now notice Jacob here. He woke from his sleep and said, surely Yahweh is in this place, and I did not know it. How long have we been in the house of Yahweh, asleep or half asleep, and didn't know that Yahweh was truly in this place? You know, we're only now coming to the deep realization of what Yahweh is doing for us, what He's done in bringing us, like He did Dada and our pastor Yisrayl, out of the deep, dark sin. And please don't miss any of these sermons. You're going to be simply amazed when you see the evidence of what I'm speaking about here today. But this is where Yahweh would be. There is no salvation anywhere else. And Yeshua said, if you try to enter any way other than the gate, this is the gate. He said, you're a thief and a robber. If you try to go anywhere else or get the knowledge from anywhere or anyone else other than Yahweh's servant. And it was Yahweh's servant that was teaching Jacob and standing there, not Yahweh himself. He's not set foot on the earth. So we got to keep these things in our mind. But Yahweh has gone to extremes trying to get our attention, trying to wake us up from our sleep as he did Jacob. You know, it's like he's standing there waving his arms, jumping up and down, screaming at the top of our lungs. And then we're sitting there, hey, did you hear something? I don't know. You want another beer? You know, and that's how it was for many years, brethren, asleep. And following after our own lusts and doing our own thing, even here at Yahweh's feast, and not realizing and getting our minds on these scriptures. But Yahweh's pulled us out of this. And the growth that's in the house is simply amazing. All right, we are there. We are at the door. But the prophecies show that Yahweh set up a standard, a banner. He's been blowing a trumpet. He lit the lamp, the only light in this dark, this world of deep, dark sins. And He's trying to get our attention. And we've got to keep paying attention. Don't let this slip. He's trying to show us and teach us here, starting in Genesis 1:26. It all goes back to Genesis 1:26. Yahweh's prophesied plan to make mankind in His image and likeness. That's what He's trying to accomplish. The world has no knowledge of this plan. They think they're already in the image and likeness of Yahweh. They think they have rulership over this earth. But you can see what their rulership has done. There's not one thing on this earth that Yahweh created that mankind hasn't ruined. So tell me they're in Yahweh's image and likeness right now? There's no way. There is no way. But this is the character He's trying to develop in us, just like He did Dada, and doing with us right now, pulling us out of these deep, dark sins. But He always did it through His servant. Look over at Hebrews 3. And really the whole chapter of Hebrews 3 and then into chapter 4 shows how He's doing this here through the Sabbath day. But notice He starts talking about the building of the house of Yahweh. He says, therefore, holy brothers and sisters, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Yeshua Messiah. Because Yahweh gave him some very special instructions here. He says, who was faithful to Yahweh, and he was faithful to Yahweh, who begot him, just as Moshe was faithful. Now, jump down to verse 4. He says, now every house is built by someone, but the one having ordained all things is Yahweh. And in every era, Yahweh had a servant on earth who built the house of Yahweh. And we heard the other night at Yeshua's memorial that that's building a people, perfecting a people, pulling a people out of the deep, dark sins of their past and turning them to Yahweh's perfect character. But this is ordained by Yahweh. And this was Yeshua's job for these last days. And that's what he's saying. We don't have time to read that whole chapter, but let's jump to the last days here in Zechariah 5. Zechariah 5, and we should know these scriptures by heart, but I'll just rehearse, if you'll mark down in your notes, verses 5 through 6, and then all the way on to verse 11. And we see that Yahweh sends someone sent by commandment. Okay, they're sent by commandment. Now this is in the last days here, a prophecy for the last days. Someone is sent by commandment. There he says in verse 5, understand. Well, not everyone can understand it. Not unless you make a commitment and start wanting to live your life according to Yahweh's character, like Yeshua did, and then like Dada did, Nora, and we'll hear more about her this feast. It's tremendous information. But to build and establish the house of Yahweh. And Yahweh promised that this one would take the standard of perfection. All right, the standard of perfection to all the world from a land that didn't even exist. And then he prophesied about Yeshua the high priest and gave Yeshua some very specific instructions here in chapter 6. In verse 11, take the silver and gold and make crowns and set them upon the head of Yeshua, son of Yahweh, the high priest. Yeshua the high priest, Hebrews 10:21. He's only the high priest over the established house of Yahweh. Now, here's where he speaks about the established house. And keep in mind, Hebrews 3, that it's built by someone but ordained by Yahweh. And neither Yahweh or Yeshua were on the earth at this time that this prophecy is speaking of. Yeshua wasn't born at the time, neither of them were born at the time that Yahweh gave this prophecy, but it was for their learning and their knowing and what to do. It was instructions and promises. He says, speak to him and say, this is what Yahweh of hosts says. Now this is a command to Yeshua. Behold the man whose name is the branch. Behold, for he will branch out from his place, and he will build the house of Yahweh. According to what? The standard of perfection. Where? In the Babylonish land, the top nation of all nations. Yes, he will bear, we'll have to skip 13 and 14, but this behold here, it means to support, to protect, and to guide, to watch closely, to watch over. So he's given Yeshua a command. This is your work. You're going to be doing it from my right hand, but you need to watch over it and make sure it gets done, because you're the firstborn of many brothers, and you need to make sure the rest of them come along. This was his instructions from Yahweh. And I want you to just notice verse 15, because we have many who have fulfilled this right here, are here today, and they who are afar off will come and help build the house of Yahweh. Then you will know that Yahweh of hosts has sent me to you. Still prophesying of this work. The work and the one who does it, the man whose name is the branch, is sent by Yahweh. And this will surely be if you will diligently obey the voice of Yahweh your Father, which we'll see that Yeshua did and Israel Hawkins did and does. They both continue to do so with no deviation whatsoever, and Yahweh testifies that in these holy writings here. But Yeshua's job was to make the last work, because that's the last work that he's talking about. He told him, make the last the first. You're the firstborn of many brothers, but here's the next brother you're going to make perfect here, he says. The next one, he's identifying him. And now Yeshua said, I and my Father are one. We're in complete accord. Be turning over, we don't have time to turn to Genesis 49, but that's where he gave the command here to tie the donkey's colt to the branch. Tie the donkeys here to the vine. We better look at it. Genesis 49. Because this was also part of these, when Yeshua said you'd be a fool and slow of heart to believe, not to believe the prophecies, he knew the prophecies. He studied them. That's how he knew he was the one sent. In verse 11, tethering, now this was given to Yeshua, tethering his donkey to the vine, and he knew he was the vine. And tethering his donkey colt, not to the vine because he wasn't going to be there, to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine and so forth. Now, Yeshua obeyed Yahweh, okay? He obeyed Yahweh completely. All right, turn over to Revelation 22:16. And we're going to see now here the proof that Yeshua obeyed completely. He did as his Father said. Yeshua said, I do nothing of my own self. He didn't hold his own opinions. He didn't do his own, reading and coming to his own conclusions about what ought to be. He took the instructions from his Father Yahweh, and he did it perfectly. But and then from Yahweh's right hand, he sent instructions to this last day's work and about this last day's work. He says in Revelation 22:16, I, Yeshua, have sent my Malach to testify to you these things in the congregations of the house of Yahweh. I am the root and offspring of David and the bright and morning star. Remember the words Malach and testify. Another word for testify is witness. And what do you call someone who witnesses? You call him a witness, right? The witness. He's identifying who he sent. It's the last witness. Well, Isaiah 43... Yeshua knew the prophecies in Isaiah. In Isaiah 43, in 1 through 4, mark that in your notes, he says, but now this is what Yahweh says, who created you, O Jacob, and formed you, O Yisrayl. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name. And there's many sermons on the names that these men had and how they received their names. And being called from his mother's womb, Israel was. But look at verse 4. Because you are precious in my sight, you have been honorable, and I have loved you. I have loved you. All right? And then in verse 10, he says, you are my witnesses. Yeshua was following the prophecies here in naming the one that he would send in the last days to witness to the congregation of the house of Yahweh. It's simply amazing. Yeshua followed Yahweh's instruction perfectly. I think my notes are sticking together here. There we go. Now, turn over to Revelation 3. Because this one that Yeshua was commanded to behold, and to guide, and guard and protect and support. He wrote them a letter. All right, in Revelation 3, in verse 7, and to the Moloch, remember, he sent his Moloch. And remember, in the days of the seventh Moloch, this plan would be finished, and the last would be first. Not first over Yeshua, not first over Yahweh, but the next ones, the very next ones after Yeshua. Remember, the first of the many brothers. Yisrayl Hawkins is the first of Yeshua's many brothers. And that job was given to him. He says, and to the Moloch of the congregation of the House of Yahweh in Philadelphia, write, these things says he who is holy, he who is true, he who has the key of David, he who opens and no man shuts. Has any man been able to stop this work? Many have tried. Many have tried to hinder it. Many have tried to stop it. They even plan to kill, Pastor. But no man can shut it. And shuts and no man's opens. I know your works, he said. He knows Israel's works. He's guiding his works. He's leading it. He's inspiring it and protecting it. I have set before you an open door, and no man can shut it. For you have a little strength. Look how small we are against this worldwide organization, this beastly system that Daniel spoke of, that controls and runs everything in this world outside these gates. But they have not been able to shut this place, have they? And notice the promise now. You've got to believe this about Yeshua's servant, Yahweh's servant, who Yeshua sent here, and you have kept my word. Well, Yeshua's word is Yahweh's word. They speak the same. They're in complete and total agreement. My laws, and have not denied my name. In other words, you have done nothing to usurp my authority or deny my authority or teach against my authority or what I stood for and standing for Yahweh. Notice verse 9. But behold, and remember Isaiah 43:4 rather, and he says, I will give men for you. And he says, behold, I give out of those of the assemblage of the accuser. How many times has pastor been accused of breaking this law or that law? We're breaking the Sabbath and we're buying and selling, we're cooking. It's all a lie. And he says it here, who preach themselves to be those who worship Yahweh and are not, but they attempt to deceive by falsehood. Behold, he says, letting him know again that he's obeying Yahweh's commandment to behold the man whose name is the branch. I will appoint them for the purpose of worshiping in the presence of your footstool, and they will understand that I love you. Now, turn over to Matthew 24, because there's one other thing here that you're going to learn about throughout this feast, something else that Yeshua is doing in beholding the man whose name is the branch. Matthew 24:30. And then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then will all the tribes of the earth mourn. This is a time when all tribes are mourning. And we're going to see this mourning that they're going through here throughout the feast. All you have to do is really look at any news clip, any at all, and you'll see the earth mourning, the people of the earth. They're suffering. The weight of sin is crushing every living thing. But the sign of the Son of Man, well, who is the Son of Man in these last days? It's Yisrayl Hawkins. So we have seen all the indicators pointing, whose face have we seen in the clouds? Yisrayl Hawkins. He is the next Son of Man that Yeshua is bringing to perfection, beholding and holding up for us. Brethren, Yahweh and Yeshua are fully supporting Yisrayl Hawkins. If we want to follow Yahweh and we want to follow Yeshua, we have no other choice. But if we deny Israel, Yeshua will deny us. Because he will say, I don't know what house you're from. I tried to tie you to the choicest branch, but you refused me. So get away from me, I never knew you. That's what he's going to say if we don't believe this. But we've got so much to see here this feast, brethren, so much that's coming here, the proof that you're going to see in great detail. Amazing pictures, amazing video of the proof of what Yeshua is doing and showing us the sign of the Son of Man. He's not showing it to the world. We're the ones seeing it. He's showing it to us. He's trying to get us to become fully awake like Jacob and fully realize that Yahweh is in this place and I did not know it. We need to know it. We need to come to that knowledge and never, ever depart from it. Remember Dada. She departed from sin never to return again. And that's the same character we need to develop, and Yahweh is desperately trying to get us to do so. Sorry for going over, and at this time, if everyone will please stand. It's my great privilege to present to you the great Khan Zephaniah Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. This is the biggest group I've ever seen. We've got several stories now that are going to show the hatred and the violence that are going on in the world, just as the prophecies show and just as Pastor Yisrayl Hawkins has been teaching us. And basically, we're going to start with the 5 officers that were sentenced for the shooting at Katrina on that bridge after that hurricane. And then we're going to get into the Afghanistan massacre where the man killed, or at least one man, maybe more, 9 children and 8 adults. And then we're going to get into something that's interesting, which is the riots in Athens. And this has been going on for several weeks, and I've got a little bit of a mix on the video. Some of the raw video is from about 3 or 4 weeks ago, but the first part, I just wanted to show you how violent it really is, because they're not really showing all the violence that's going on. They kind of just show little clips. But a man committed suicide, and the suicide rate in Athens is up, in Greece is up 40%. Because of this new austerity program that the banks have put into place. And the man in his suicide note, it's almost like what Conchol was saying about the mourning, the earth mourning. And this is a part of the blessing and part of their hunger. And you can see it in the things that they're saying. This beastly governmental system is affecting their lives, so they no longer want to live anymore. And he wrote, the government has annihilated any hope for my survival. So you could say the beastly governmental system has annihilated any hope for my survival, and I could not get any justice. A man on the street then says, the government is destroying my dignity. They mock me as a person, and the only things they care about are bank accounts. They don't care about anything else. And then the story says, life for some is too much to bear. And this is the system where you do not follow the 1 cent. You don't believe into the 1 cent. This is the alternative system. And then we got a 19-year-old in Michigan killed his ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend, and killed the girlfriend's mother with an axe. It was a real brutal attack. And then a mass murder in Oakland, California. And all these things have just been occurring just in the last few weeks. And the violence, I could go on and on for hours with violence on these videos. So I'll play the video.
Pay close attention. What you are seeing today is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy. Well, Jeff, in this segment of YPN News, it looks like we don't have much joyous news to talk about.
Not at all, Katan. In fact, the Savior gave us this prophecy. He said that when iniquity would abound, you would see the love of many grow cold. And that's exactly what we're seeing in these articles. We started off talking about 5 former New Orleans police officers are about ready to find out their punishment for their role in a deadly shooting on the Danziger Bridge in 2005. Now, in the days following Hurricane Katrina, 5 New Orleans police officers played a role in gunning down unarmed civilians on the Danziger Bridge and then covering up the incident. Now, last fall, the officers were convicted of numerous crimes in federal court, and tomorrow they're about to be formally sentenced.
Wow. Robert Jenkins, a legal analyst, had this to say to a WDSU Channel 6 news reporter. It's going to be a sad day for NOPD because these are going to be some very, very long sentences.
A jury ruled that former officers opened fire on the bridge in early September of 2005, an incident that injured 6 and left 2 people dead. A federal judge, Kurt Engelhardt, is expected to sentence those 4 officers to at least 30 years in jail.
Well, now if you look at the numbers, we're looking at a life sentence, meaning they'll never walk out of jail unless, of course, an appeal, Jenkins said. And a likelihood of an appeal, in my opinion, is very slim. The 5th former officer convicted, Arthur Kaufman, a former homicide detective who was convicted of covering up what really happened on the bridge. Now, he faces a lighter sentence than the other 4.
Jenkins went on to say he's going to get jail time, and it's going to be substantial, in my opinion. Now, last week, attorneys for the convicted police officers asked Judge Engelhardt to delay the sentencing due to comments made by former federal prosecutor Sal Perricone. The judge denied that request. Perricone made negative online remarks under an alias about some of the officers and the case during the trial. Now, Arthur Kaufman, the only former officer free on bond, he could be taken into custody tomorrow.
Well, you know, it's kind of amazing that the sad part that they mentioned in this article is that these officers are going to be getting some very long sentences. Well, what about the victims?
That's like the true sad part.
That's right. And what led these officers to do what they allegedly did. Now, the love continues to grow cold, as is evident from this next report. Robert Bales, a 38-year-old U.S. soldier and father of 2 from Ohio, who was serving in Afghanistan, has recently been charged with killing 17 civilians early last month, 9 of them being children. The victims were either shot, stabbed, or burned. Staff Sergeant Bales is now in a U.S. military jail.
Due to the extreme nature of the crime, villagers and Afghan President Hamid Karzai aren't buying the notion that Bales acted alone. President Karzai stated in a recent statement, in 4 rooms people were killed, children and women were killed, and then they were all brought together in one room and put on fire. That, he said, one man cannot do.
General Sher Mohammed Karim, the Afghan Army Chief of Staff, said, I'm guessing he was helped by someone, whether one person or 2 persons. Now, according to the report that was given, on March 11th, just after midnight, Staff Sergeant Bales set out on foot from a military base south of Kandahar to 2 Afghan villages to commit these alleged crimes. The first Western journalist to reach the scene was struck with the claim that more than one killer was involved.
One family member of several of the victims said, they came into my rooms and they killed my family, my 2 sons, my nephew, my mother, who were sleeping in that room. Also, an 8-year-old named Normanak was shot in the leg by one of the soldiers, but she also claims that there were other people there.
She said, one entered the room and the others were standing in the yard, holding lights. My mother was screaming, and he held a gun to her head, and my father said, leave her alone, and he shot him right there. Now, Afghan guards on duty that day said that Bales was the only one to return to the base.
Bales has made no confession. Staff Sergeant Bales has already served 3 tours in Iraq and suffered a head injury while there. Doctors will determine if he's mentally competent to stand trial. America has paid relatives $50,000 for each dead civilian and $11,000 for each of the injured.
Well, sounds more like an insult than recompense.
It's sad when a price is set on someone's life.
That's right. Yeah. Now, of course, the Afghan people and its government aren't satisfied with these measures, and they want U.S. troops confined to their base by next year.
Well, we now turn to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who is reporting on the state of economy in Greece. And Larry, we know that if Greece isn't listening to what Yisrayl Hawkins has been saying, things aren't getting better. What can you tell us?
That's right, Jeff. And as proof of that, the streets of Athens burned with flames again this week as scores of protesters exhibited their discontent with the Grecian government by unleashing Molotov cocktails and hurling stones. As the crowd began to swell and the police attempted to calm them, there was little they could do to stem the turmoil. Nearby, candles illuminated a memorial erected in memory of a pensioner whose suicide was the catalyst for this week's unrest. The 77-year-old gentleman who shot himself in broad daylight right outside the parliamentary building located in the center of the city is the latest casualty symbolizing the hardships of the Grecian economy. And his death was quickly mourned with the shrine of candles and messages, one of which begged the question, who will be the next victim? The retired pharmacist who was dependent on his pension left behind a family, and his sense of hopelessness is one felt by many others in Greece as well. In his suicide note, the pensioner wrote, "The government has annihilated any hope for my survival, and I could not get any justice. I could not find any other form of struggle except a dignified end before I had to start scrounging for food from the rubbish." In the first few months of this year, Greece's suicide rate rose by 40%. Last month, however, Greece actually secured its bailout, but only after agreeing to drastic cuts in tax increases to which many citizens feel they are the unfair targets. To quote one citizen, "As a Greek, I am truly shocked. I am shocked because I see that the government is destroying my dignity. They mock me as a person, and the only thing they care about is bank accounts. They don't care about anything else." Sadly, the future for Greece doesn't seem to hold much promise for improvement. 1 in 5 Greek citizens are unemployed. Almost half of those under 25 are without work, and life today for many in Greece is simply unbearable. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Gatan, Jeff, back to you.
Thanks for those articles, Larry. Jeff, it's interesting the extremes people will go to find relief for their oppression. In fact, we can see that it looks like people there in Greece, but all over the world, they don't find any hope to their problems today.
It's sad that they don't know that there is a solution to the problems that they face.
That's right.
Continuing in our articles, Livonia police are investigating the scene of a gruesome double murder-suicide. Wednesday morning, 19-year-old Brian White entered the home where his 17-year-old ex-girlfriend lived with her family. Police say she had recently broken up with Brian White, which sparked some extreme rage. He killed her mom, 42-year-old Angela Staperfine, and the girl's current boyfriend, 19-year-old Jacob Burns, with an axe.
Somehow, the 17-year-old girl survived. She called 911 after police say White shot himself in the head. Friends of the Stevenson High School student and her family are in shock.
One friend of the victim couldn't believe this had taken place. He said, especially to these people, out of all people, it's a tragic.
Wow. I could definitely see that outcome being a lot different had they all been taught the peaceful solution. Well, sadly, the carnage continues as we close out this segment of news with 7 dead and 3 wounded after a shooting in a small California religious university. And Oakland police say they have the suspect in custody. Oikos University in Oakland, California is where this latest tragedy has left residents and school officials, as well as the attendees alike, asking themselves and each other, why?
Lee Cohen from CBS News reported that the shootings that took place was believed to be the result of one lone gunman and that the Oakland police, as we've said, have the suspect in custody. School officials believe that the suspect was a former student.
Now, witnesses say that they heard at least 30 shots in rapid succession. One student of the university said that she heard gunshots and a woman scream. Police carried out the dead and laid them outside on the ground as the SWAT team swept through the building looking for more people desperate to get out.
A mile away from the school at a shopping center, police detained a man there calling a possible suspect. One woman who was interviewed who is also employed at the university, was left speechless in light of the devastating events. Although she said little, you could see that she was still in shock, and you could see the extreme sadness and terror that she experienced because of the loss of lives.
Yeah. Well, the thing is with these articles that we just covered here, it's easy to look at the perpetrators or the people who actually committed these alleged crimes and say that they're the cause of it. But it really goes back to a system that has trained people to reject the laws that would actually bring peace.
A system that doesn't teach them how to practice self-control, which is controlling your thoughts, emotions, and actions, and a system that doesn't teach them to have any care or concern for life.
A total lack of respect and value for everything that's living is what's bringing our world down today. But there is a solution.
Stay tuned for Yisrayl Hawkins, who will give you the solution to all these problems and many more. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for joining us.
Everyone, please stand. The greatest teacher in the world, the great Kohan Yisrayl Hawkins. Shalom, everyone. Welcome home. Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. What a precious group this is, and you're going to see that more as this feast continues. The meal today, I know you would probably never want to think about food again after stuffing yourself last night. And may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. I wasn't even going to eat last night because I only eat one meal a day, and I ate that at noon yesterday, 12. But I didn't think the priests would notice when I went up there and sat down without food, but they did. And then here they come with an overstuffed plate and one bite, and I broke my rule. Things are easily turned around, and I told cooks this morning when I found out what they were serving, I said, well, I wasn't going to eat today either, but now I've got to eat this okie chicken fajitas. Oh boy, it's made with sauteed onions. You could eat a barrel of that by itself. And then this salsa, this special made salsa that they have here. My mouth is watering, so I can't go on with this. And then the end of the aged cheese. End of the aged cheese. Praise Yahweh. I just want to read you a couple of things here to show you. I know you remember, hope you remember, what I brought out about Genesis 49 and what we've inherited from them. Now, if you'll think about the scriptures, because I know you've wondered about they without us will not be made perfect. And of course, this has been a puzzling scripture to all the world, and only Yahweh's house could answer that question, and why, and because we're the only ones that knows the plan of Yahweh. Well, of course, you were showed perfection on Yeshua's memorial, and you were showed it at this time for a reason, because that's our lot, that's our standard of perfection that Yahweh is setting before His house. Now, I must say you achieved this before it was shown, which is wonderful. Praise Yahweh.
I saw you grow for 40 years. For 40 years now, I've seen you grow, coming out of the hatred that you just saw from what the great Kohan Safanya, the news that he is showing you there just now about the hatred that's going on in the world. You came out of that. You'd be a part of it if you hadn't. You'd be out there fighting with them. And of course, the Savior, they rejected the standard of perfection that Yahweh set before them, as they're doing the last days house. And of course, Yeshua, he showed the pattern of this great working plan of Yahweh, showing how that perfect marriage would take place, inviting people not showing up. Why didn't you keep your appointment? Well, I didn't like the way the Sabbath was being kept. I had kinfolks I had to go see. And he says, Yahweh was angry with their excuses and said, well, they'll never partake of my rest. Well, they can't even understand what Yahweh's rest is. But they think they're Bible scholars. And the commentators, they think they are Bible scholars. The things that they're studying, they don't realize how much they've been changed. And unless that's shown to you by a higher power, as Yeshua said to Kepha, he said, flesh and blood alone has not shown this to you, Kepha, but my Father in heaven has shown this to you. When Kepha recognized the one sent and said, you are that one sent. Well, if you think about what took place, what Yahweh said in Genesis 49, he said, you're going to, in the last days, the very first verse there says, I'm going to show you what's going to take place in the last day. Well, yes, there's a prophecy there about Yeshua in the last days house and thithering the donkeys to the vine, which was Yeshua, and the donkey's coats to the branch, which is me. Me. Menorah. Oh boy, that's so beautiful, and the meaning is so deep that it takes years to understand what it's talking about. If you look behind me, you will see some work that our young priestess did. You talk about a magnificent group of people. Those young priestess, brethren, the world is so far from them, it's pitiful. Their righteousness, their attitudes, their service attitudes, and our young priest, they're begging for service. They're wanting to say, well, what can I do? I want to serve. It's hard to find enough work for them. Well, do you mind getting up at 5 o'clock and being ready to go at 5:30? No, I'll be glad to. Mama, Daddy, I got to get up at 5 in the morning. I got to go to work with the priest. Well, the same thing's going on next door in the women's field. And, of course, they did this beautiful artwork behind me. I can see it in the monitor, so I don't have to look behind me, but I think you can see it also, part of it. But that cloud that Yahweh showed me that day at the recording studio, when I drove up to the recording studio and I looked over, and there was the homestead to my right, and that cloud was setting right over the top of that homestead, and with a perfect donkey and a perfect pack on his back, and he had the attention of that cloud in front of him that later Yahweh put in front of the Feast of Green Ears, Feast of Lights moon, Feast of Menorah moon. You get it? Feast of Menorah moon, the lights. The 7-lamp lampstand. It's menorah, my work. This is my work. Let me read you something. You can't understand because the language changes. That's the reason people get screwed up on the Sabbath day. It was changed. They greatly polluted the Sabbath day because they took service. They took holy service out of the Sabbath. Therefore, without the holy service, you can't keep the Sabbath holy. When you take the service out, the holy service instituted, inspired, commanded by Yahweh, you remove the keeping of the Sabbath as Yahweh kept the Sabbath. It's no longer holy. Lazy, violent, ruthless men were allowed to go to extremes under the Nimrod system, take over the kingdom of Yahweh, right, wrong the Scriptures, and you could read the Scriptures from, for 1,000 years and still not understand. Well, he says rest on the Sabbath, and you got at least 1,000 interpretations of what the word means. Now, unless you are willing to take the finishing work that Yahshua set before us, who was our perfect example, then you would never understand how to keep the Sabbath. But you can go on thinking yourself a scholar, holding yourself up as a scholar, you or your wife. I remember 2 school teachers, a man and a woman, that came to, when we had the work at the press room. It's now the press room in Abilene, and they were there, and the woman was quite a scholar, she thought. And of course, I had more time then to visit and talk to people than I do now. It's hard for me to carry on a conversation on the phone more than a minute. But at that time, I had some leisure time to talk to everyone that came to the feast, and of course, I would show her where she was wrong. The man wasn't too much interested. He was just going by what his wife said. But anyway, they left on some of the goofiest reasons. We had 28 people walk out one time, which left us with 13 because of the holy garments. And they didn't want to wear the holy garments. And of course, the holy garments that they didn't want to wear was righteousness, the same righteousness that you find in menorah. It's not menorah. If you're an Okie, you'll pronounce it right. They're pronouncing it wrong. It's menorah. To understand what I'm saying, you'd have to go back and read the history of the word me. I'll read some of it to you. It says, me is used in many constructions, talking about changes. The constructions means to change it down through the years. And of course, all the English language the English language is going through the same changes. And if you read just 100 years ago, which we have Bibles that was printed back in the 1800s, I think we have one that was 17-something, but at the 1800s, and you see the early English, you can't even read it, most of it. We've practiced to try to do so, but it's hard. But we're going through the same changes today. I have a song, I don't know, do you still have that, Yakanon, that song, Who Was the Fools That Made Up the Rules for the English Language? Maybe we'll play it tomorrow. Maybe we'll play it tomorrow. But it gets so ridiculous sometimes because they make changes, they see the changes don't work, so they added vowel points. Now this is what David, the great Yehuda, frowns on. The vowel points that was added to change the Hebrew language. And the Hebrew language when you read menorah or menorah, you knew instantly it was I, Yahweh, my work. This is my plan, my 7 plans of work that is going to bring perfection. And that perfection, Yahshua himself was, without sin. Nora herself was, who was pulled out of sin. And then in these last days, the prophecy shows he would do this same thing again with a group that would be first to receive the authority. Yes. Yeshua has not received all the authority yet. All judgment's been given to him, but he hasn't received all the authority that he is going to receive with us, the last group. And they, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the whole 12 tribes, they won't receive it. What they have received is a witch's concoction of screwed up genes that science is just now discovering, by the way. Here's a little bit of what they have received. Micro mag shots, they line up of persistent offenders. TB, tuberculosis. It is said that up to 1/3 of the world's population have a dormant form which can reactivate if the immune system weakens. Now you're carrying this. Where did you get it from? Yahweh shows in Genesis 49. You got it from Abraham's children. Abraham himself was not perfect. He won't be made perfect without us. Now that's what your scripture says. It was hard to understand, and then it's also hard to teach, but we're getting the glimpse of it now from Noah. And of course, Yahshua, because we see Yahshua, now we see Noah presented in just the right time period. And I don't say that lightly. When you see the work that the priests have done, and our doctor, our professor of music, the great Dr. Michael Ossoff, who has put the work into something that is glorious now to listen to, but he's also been shown things. Not only he, that woman, the women was shown many things in the writings that's jumping back and forth in that original Hebrew. That's original Hebrew that you see there, that square box and the other box. Why don't you see that today in your writing? If you could see it and understand it, you could read what Yahweh meant by resting on my Sabbath day, or remember to keep holy my Sabbath day. You can't keep it holy with your mind on yourself, laying on your can and saying to my wife, get me some dinner. You know, this is not keeping the Sabbath holy, but you can get off your can and come and serve Yahweh by serving the little ones, and you will keep it holy. If you think of how ridiculous you look when you're trying to keep it another way, and here's the wife trying to fix your meal and say, oh, I just boiled that water. Oh, I broke the Sabbath. No. You know, if you'll think of all these ridiculous things that you're going through, you know, and realize you're not keeping the Sabbath. You're making a mockery out of the Sabbath. But that's what the house of Yahweh was made for. That's what it was built for. And step by step, we're coming out of the world and coming to this perfection that Yahweh wants you to see in Noah. Yes, me, Noah, in my work. Well, in his work, it's only on the seventh and last work that he brings this perfection about. Now listen to this next one that you inherited from Abraham and his children. It wasn't a perfect world. Noah was part of that world that Yahweh destroyed. He was part of it. So he didn't have true genes either. And what he came out of, he brought after the flood and introduced it into the next lifespan. He too couldn't give up drinking. Do you think I wanted you to quit drinking for no reason? Over drinking, which is real easy done, it damages the brain. And people have told me now that they have stayed off of the wine and beer for a while. Their minds have cleared up and they think more clearly now. Praise Yahweh, right? We've had people that said, you know, they were alcoholics until this took place, and they found out they could quit. And then we had people that said, you know, after I found out I could quit that, I decided I was going to quit smoking, and I haven't smoked a cigarette yet. Well, that's the peaceful solution that brought forth menorah. Genes mutation contributes to autism. There's so many people with autism, unnoticed, of course, but you would think, well, there's just a few cases, but there's not. I would say probably 90% of the people are plagued with that and don't know it. They're in a lesser form of it. It's a mental diseases that they know now that half the people have it, over half the people in the world have it. Mental diseases. I read years ago, I brought out how the makeup of the human body and the genes, of course, that paints a pattern of your life. And of course, it's shown in your face as I've tried to get and have been successful in getting the butchers to see this in the animals, and the people that take care of the cattle now and the goats, they can spot these things in the face. And of course, Yahweh says your faces show it when you have these things. It's not something that you can hide. You know, you could have plastic surgery and still it would come out. But it says here now, this new study that they're just finding out, U.S. researchers estimate there are likely about 1,000 or more genes that contribute to autism. Genes. The genes that came from Abraham. He also had some righteous genes that also was coming from Abraham. And Yahweh set up a breeding program, said Isaac had to go to a certain place to get a wife. Then others in his bloodline were inspired to do the same thing, to come down to Yeshua to breed the perfect person, who had to overcome also, and he overcame like us, and without sin. Without sin. Then he also brought forth Nora, who fell into sin, but she kept studying and praying that the righteous one would come. And of course, her prayers were answered. And it was in that period of time where she was actually brought out of deep sin, like we have been today in these last days. But over 1,000 or more genes that contribute to one case of autism. Over 1,000 different genes. Now, if you think of the work that we have done on Genesis 49, what would be in these last days, and Yahweh says this is what you're going to inherit. in the last day. And then in the last days, probably the worst of us have been pulled out of that deep, dark period of sin and brought to near perfection right now. I'm seeing how far you've come because I saw what a mess you were when you came here. and I was a worse mess trying to teach you. They found multiple variations between unaffected and affected groups. So the genes were in the unaffected. You see these people, you don't know that they got it because it's not showing unless you just studied what Yahweh shows us in the Holy Scriptures, like our men do the animals. But without that, you'd be seeing people walk up and down the street, and you'd never know that they had this in their bodies until something weakened in their body, a defense system that Yahweh set up to hold it, to try to hold it. But you can weaken that defense system, as the article on tuberculosis shows, and then once that defense system is weakened, then these genes, these 1,000 or more genes that's waiting there to burst out and come forth with autism, take over. Well, that's what we've inherited. We found multiple variations between unaffected and affected groups, specifically among a total of 279 coding mutations. They identified a single instance in individual children with autism spectrum disorder, and not in siblings, in which two independent mutations disrupt the gene SCN2A. The same mutation was found in all of the unrelated. These children were unrelated. So they didn't get it from each other. They didn't get it from, the parents didn't get it from the other parents. They were unrelated with autism spectrum disorder, confirming its importance. Well, see, the science is proving what Yahweh said thousands of years ago. Well, back now to me and Nora. The word "me" is in many constructions where strict grammarians prescribe "I." This usage is not so much ungrammatical as inductive of the shrinking range of the normative form, me. Me began to replace I sometime around the 16th century, largely because of the pressure of word order I is now chiefly used as the subject of an immediately following verb. Me occurs in every other position. And when you hear that word, who made up the rules? See what they did? They make up rules, and then they find their own mistakes, and then they start trying to do something else to cover their mistakes. So they make another letter or another vowel point, as they did in the Hebrew, in order to change what they were changing. If you remember, I showed you that the Galileans would not go for this change. Neither did we. And we kept working and trying to find books. And of course, years ago, we had some people doing it in Washington, D.C., that was going to places that we had located, and we asked them, could you go there and try to find these books for us? And of course, now we have a slew of books that we can actually go back to this block language that you see written in the clouds over the house of Yahweh. That block you see there with age, that is Yahweh. And that other one is the holy people that you're going to come to, if you will listen to the one sent. I won't read it. There's a bunch more of this, but the letter I, the one thing I want you to understand here is the one who is speaking or writing. Now this is what me replaced. Compare me, mine, my, we. I mean what I replaced, I. But compare I, me. Let me read that again to you. Compare me, mine, my, we. Usage, see me. Okay. What this is saying of this candle stand. As you know from other scriptures, it's Yahweh's work. His 7 candle stand is the work that sets before Him in heaven right now. And of course, we are the last work on that. We're the 7th and last work on that candle stand, as is shown in Revelations, where Yahshua, praise Yahweh, where Yahshua actually gives power to His 2 witnesses, to power to understand all of this concoction, this witch's concoction that we have had slowly emerge down through the centuries to where the original Hebrew language is forgotten. And of course we're dealing with a King James Version that everybody of course understands that there's literally thousands of mistakes in. I noticed this. I noticed in the King James Version mistakes. Back when I was 17 years old, I saw many of these mistakes, and one of them was the fact about the Sabbath, where it says you will do no work. And I said, this is not so, because of the other scriptures that they fail to deceive on, which says work. This language said, no work of you. No work of you shall you do. The work of Yahweh is different from the work of you. In 6 days you will do labor and do all your work. But the 7th day you shall do no work of you on that day. You'll take your place, Yahweh says. Stand in your place on that day. Well, your place is given to you by Yahweh Himself. He calls you for that place in His house. And it's made up of many members. His house, which is shown, He showed this. What you're seeing right here is what these 2 teachers saw over the house of Yahweh in the original block language. And in that we got some priest that's going to bring you the meanings of this. But you see that original block language, we can now go back to this. And of course, once you go back to it, you see, well, that's the reason that you couldn't understand it when you saw the King James Version. Yeah, but we have concordances and dictionary. Yeah, and they're screwed up too. And I've told you, I argue with these dictionaries all the time. And there's a subject, and I just said a word that's supposed to not be there. Well, there's a man that knows what he's talking about. That word theirs. I put it in that song, and I was challenged on it. They said there's no such a word. I said, I've been using that word for 60 years. Don't tell me that word. But if you'll go back a ways to another dictionary, you'll find that word. And they were arguing about it back then, and the dictionary says, I don't have the copy with me, but it says, there's enough said on that subject. That's the last thing it said. But the language changes. Well, they said to the Galileans, they said, they were unlearned and ignorant men. Well, Yahshua, he was trained in their schools. Yahweh saw to it that he was. But the disciples grew up in Galilee. The Galileans were the so-called stupid ones because they wouldn't go along with the rebellious Nimrod schools. The Nimrod system that existed and said, we can make a lot of money out of this if we just, control all these people, and here's how we'll control all these people. So they built them a tower, an educational tower, to educate the people the way they wanted them to be educated. Well, of course, Yahweh's priests who were in Galilee, where the disciples were all born and brought up, they would not go for this. They wouldn't go for the change. The prophet Jeremiah, he was still prophesying in the name of Yahweh. And the people at Konot, they said, don't prophesy to us in the name of Yahweh anymore, or you're going to die. That's what they said to my brother thousands of years later. Don't give this to our children. Don't let me see one of these booklets passed out anymore, or we're going to carry you away from here in a pine box. And they meant it. They were going to kill him, and he knew they would. And he knew they could do it and get away with it. That's the way Israel is set up right now. That's the reason they have so much power over the Palestinians, over the Muslims. The Muslims can call the police, and if you know anything about what goes on, the police never come when they are called by the Muslims. They only come when they're called by the Israelis. Well, in this way, it's unfair, unjust, yes. And that's the way it's been now for 6,000 years. Yahshua said to his disciples, come here, I'm going to tell you something. You know that these people rule over one another, and those in higher power are ruling over them and telling them what to do. Well, what is shown over Yahweh's house is far different. My face appeared over this house in the clouds. We have a picture of it for you. Sometime during the feast, we're going to get to all of this, Yahweh willing. If not this feast, tabernacles. No, we're going to get to it this feast. and David, you're going to get to speak this feast. Don't worry, 30 minutes at least. But the light was coming through my mouth in this cloud and my eyes. The light of Yahweh. Now, this is what makes the manna from heaven. This is the manna from heaven, built without hands, built without, not of this generation, as the commentators say. They don't know what it means, but that's what they say. It's built without hands. Flesh and blood alone cannot show you these things, Keeper. You had to get this from a higher power to know that I am the one sent. Yes, that has to come from Yahweh. Now, to back that up, Yahshua said, you cannot come to me unless Yahweh allows it, unless Yahweh Himself allows this. Now, you were brought to me, but 3 out of 4 who He brought to me have fallen away. And that's been the pattern of the house of Yahweh, shown by Yahshua, that it would be in that manner. 3 out of 4 will fall away, not because of the teaching, Because I'm teaching, Yahweh tells you what I'm going to teach, and I'm not going to change that. But, praise Yahweh. Every bit of my life has been prophesied in the Holy Scriptures, just like it was Yahshua. And Yahweh shows that in the last days, on this seventh lamp, as the great Kohan Shaul just got through bringing out, that Yahweh predicts everything that I will teach you, and what we will do was bring the standard of perfection to fulfillment in this time period. Now, that's the reason they're not going to make it without us. They, without us, will not become perfect. You know what we're going to have to do? Well, think of it. We'll have to resurrect these people. And then we're going to have to catch them up on everything that you know that they didn't learn. Then, once this is done, we will all receive the power. After that, everyone will receive it. Before that, you've got to receive the power in order to resurrect them. Think of that, the power of life and death. You're going to receive that. We will not all be changed. We will not all die. But we will be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at or by the last trump. Last trumpeter. You got that? Last trumpeter. We are the voice of Yahshua. That's what he shows. My Malach testifies these things to you. My messenger. Yes, that's what the last or seventh trumpeter is. He's a messenger. We are Yahshua's messenger. Unified, made one, doing a tremendous work as individuals in these last days. This little group is now reaching all the entire world. There's no place on earth that is not being heard from this voice right here. Right now. And Yahweh brought that to pass. Well, let me see the card. What did I do with that card? Here it is. So with all that, these words and their changes here, I want you to turn over to Hebrews 2, and I want you to know, and remember this now, I've never asked for miracles, have I? Never. I said I don't want miracles. I want to be the one that believes without seeing. And I said, I want all of you to do that. I can do without the miracles. We read about people who had miracles and they fell away by the thousands. They came to Yahshua, they saw the miracles, they supposedly repented, halfway repented, and then halfway they kept the other half over here, half of their brain geared to Christianity. So immediately Satan pulled it away from them and they fell away. First thing you knew, they wasn't even keeping the Sabbath at all. Well, I didn't like the way Yahshua kept the Sabbath, or his disciples. Well, what were they doing? They're working. They're working? On Yahweh's Sabbath, you're not supposed to do any work. Oh, that's the reason that group of rabbis, that group of lords said, hey, us don't have any movement at all. Let's lay real still. Well, what about your bowels? Don't let them move. You better stop breathing too, because that's work. Well, see, you got 10,000 different opinions. If you want to read the Talmud, you'll find each one of these opinions that the Lord's put in there. There's another word close to menorah, if you wanted to read it, and it means the Lord's work. And it showed how, through education, they set up police departments. They would get people for breaking their line of rules in that town. And the Lord would collect that money as fines from those people. Look in the dictionary. It's a word that is so close to menorah that it's amazing. I was amazed, and I knew all about the word rabbi and how it actually, that those are the lords that the people worship. But when I read that, I was surprised. That was only yesterday that I saw that. Maybe I'll bring that to you. Anyway, on the changes, the lords, they brought this about, and they would put whatever they wanted into the language, and then they would force the people, and they would set laws, and if you broke those laws, they would fine you. Well, this was a great income that came into them. So what they were doing right here, they were setting up a system by force, of course, because the people from Galilee wouldn't accept it, so they started killing them off. Well, here now in Hebrews, the apostles, they did a work in their time. And notice carefully what it said. We didn't ask for miracles. None of you did. But you came to perfection, and you stuck with it. You actually stuck strong, hanging on to Yahweh, or Yahweh hanging on to you. He says he's holding me by my right hand, which means I'm on his left side. Remember? That's the scripture. So, you know, you're all with me. If you're in unity, he's hanging on to you. Praise Yahweh. Well, here in Hebrews 2, and notice verse 1, he says, therefore, we must pay more careful attention to the things which we have heard, so that at no time should we let them slip away. Because you can do this if you don't pay attention. People can put a bug in your ear, some false gossip, some negative gossip, and before you know, you're repeating it. And before you know, you'll get to believe in this crap. And this is how Satan gets you. And then the next thing you know, you're not part of the body anymore, but you're fighting against it, trying to tear the house down with your words, spreading gossip. This is how it starts. This is how it started years ago. This is how all these false religions got started. Thousands and thousands of them. And every one of them, when they found out, hey, this group wants this, well, let's create a religion and give it to them. So they create a religion that says, well, we won't be so strict on you. You don't have to lay like this on the Sabbath all 24 hours. You can actually get up and move around, but you can't do this. So how many people would agree with that? Well, a certain group. When Constantine came, he saw all this argument and fighting about the Holy Scripture and all the different opinions. And he called his wise men, all the wise men, and said, I want you to come up with one God that we can all worship in unity. He had a great idea, you know. He just didn't have any knowledge or wisdom to go with it. But then they couldn't come up with a God, so he chose the two gods, and Krishna and Zeus, and he says, well, I'm going to set a God for you, and if you don't worship this God, then you're damned. I'm going to kill you. And he passed a law that everyone had to worship this God. Well, of course, this is why it was put in the King James Version as Jesus Christ. Because his name was Yeshua, remember? So they put Jesus Christ in there. That's because of all these opinions, and the reason they got them was because the language was changed. In order to get these opinions more foundation to stand on, they changed this, that. They got to where they couldn't change the words, so they created vowel points. They couldn't stand that much longer, so they had to create more vowel points, had to change letters from this to that. That's what we've inherited today. But brethren, we're standing on perfection as Yahweh said we would. Now notice verse 2. For since the word spoken by the messengers is steadfast, and every transgression, it is steadfast, and the original, and every transgression and disobedience. Disobedience to what? Yeshua told you, believe the one sent. Go to the one sent. You can't go wrong there. Yahweh couldn't hold you guilty by going to the one sent and doing what he says. No way. How would he have you guilty for that? He can't. You're scot-free if you'll do that. And he will praise you for it very, very soon. Every transgression and disorder receives a just repayment of reward. How will we escape if we neglect going to the one sent? So great a salvation as going to the one sent, having received, started proclaiming, and it was confirmed to us by those who heard him. Now verse 4, Yahweh also bearing testimony both with signs and wonders. That's exactly what we're seeing now after we prove we believe without seeing. Now Yahweh is showing you the signs and the wonders. I actually prayed for him not to do it. I said, I want this group to believe without seeing. Praise Yahweh. That's the reason when I saw that first sign, that first donkey on the cloud over the homestead that stretched all the way back to the sanctuary, and I came and told you, I think you've made it. Praise Yahweh. Both with signs and wonders, and with various acts of power, miracles, gifts of Spirit holy, according to his own will, according to the will of Yahweh. Well, we proved it to him. We did. We stood fast under pressure, under persecution. This right here is some beautiful information. These are beautiful bindings, too, that they have put together. Where did I put it? Here. They have the latest knowledge for the ones that are coming to perfection. Isn't that beautiful? That right there. The first book of Yisrayl, he who rules as Yahweh rules, making the connection with Yahweh. Children's edition. The children's edition. Parents, you've got to get that. You've got to get that for your children. Build your children up, by the way. Don't run them down. Hold your temper. Watch what you're saying. Build your children up. They're the best in the world. They're so close to Yahweh right now. Build your wife up. Don't tear her down. Who is it that don't like burnt biscuits here? I want to meet you. I've always loved lumpy gravy. I sure am glad you made that for me today. I've been missing that. No, we don't have that today. We have by even. This one, the 11th book of Yisrayl, he who rules as Yahweh rules, the end of the ages. And that's what you see, the age with a period after it, the end of the age. Part 2, yet there's one more. 2010, a collection of prophetic words and newsletters. The last warning, 2010, back to 2010. You need all of these. Take them home with you. Please take them home with you. You couldn't get your child or anyone else a better gift than that right there. Now that would be a gift I would accept. May Yahweh bless you. May Yahweh bless you. I love you. I love you. Praise